it's really important for us to keep our fingers on the pulse of clinical trends, and that includes clinical trials. That's because it takes years to develop new platforms like our next generation Azurion biplane, and we need to see where the puck is headed as we develop these platforms. So take, for instance, the SEGA trial that was just presented recently at the SVIN. Now, they reached some very provocative conclusions. The trial looked at patients undergoing general anesthesia versus those that underwent conscious sedation for mechanical thrombectomy. And in this trial, general anesthesia won in terms of improved outcomes. But you have to dig a little bit deeper, because I've been getting a lot of direct messages and questions from physicians. I think that people feel that there's no question that if you have a site that has instant access to anesthesiologists, those that are well-trained in blood pressure management during the course of the thrombectomy, then it's, no pun intended, a no-brainer. You should use general anesthesia. But what do you do if you have to wait an hour for the anesthesiologist? Do you wait for the hour, or do you go right away using conscious sedation? Because time is brain, seconds count. You're losing 2 million neurons every minute a stroke is in progress. And so we fully recognize that general anesthesia is going to be very much part of future neurointerventions, and that's why platforms like our next generation Azurion biplane has been built to optimize the flexibility in the workflow, to work around the physicians and the doctors and the nurses and the equipment like general anesthesia equipment. But it also triggers us to look to see, can we better stratify which patients might benefit from anesthesia versus which ones will be a faster procedure? And so we're looking very actively at things like clot localization, clot characterization. You know, maybe if we can identify a clot ahead of time and we know that it's posterior or more distal or what it's made out of, whether it's fiber-enriched or not, that might help you triage whether or not the patient undergoes general anesthesia, or even triage whether or not you use a certain type of device to get the first pass success. So a lot of our research is currently underway to look to see whether we can use things like spectral CT powered by AI, get the information about composition and localization, and then integrate it into the Azurion to navigate and guide the procedure. The ZODIAC trial was another very interesting trial recently presented at the ISC, with also some very provocative and stunning conclusions. You know, the ZODIAC trial shows us that not all innovations in interventions needs to be high-tech and high-cost. Here, the investigators were looking at something very simple: zero-degree positioning. If they leave a patient flat while they're waiting for the stroke team to assemble, or while they're waiting for that patient to be transferred, will that improve outcomes? And in fact, just by that simple maneuver, they were able to show that they were improving outcomes following thrombectomy, not just at 24 hours, but even at 7 days. So this is a bit of a bridge solution. It's allowing hospitals to buy time, potentially, while they're waiting for people to show up, leveraging this concept of positional cerebral ischemia. But really, again, the root cause of this is that we don't have enough staff. We don't have enough well-trained neurointerventionalists around the world. And the clock is ticking, seconds count with stroke. So as Philips, we're asking ourselves, how can we help save time so that physicians can save neurons while they're waiting for the team to arrive? That's why we've actually launched the WeTrust trial. The WeTrust trial is all about saving time. It's a Philips-sponsored randomized controlled trial, and patients are put into 2 categories: some that undergo a direct-to-angio suite approach, where they get a cone beam CT on a Philips Azurion, for instance, and another group of patients is triaged in a different way, the conventional way, with a CT or MRI before coming to the angio suite. And it's an outcome study. The goal is to look at 500 patients across 15 centers around the world and see if a direct-to-angio suite approach saves not just time, but also improves outcome. Now, we already have some early data. We had just enrolled our 100th patient. And early data is showing that we're saving about 45 minutes of time by using this approach. And I think that if you look at all of these clinical trials together, if we can triage the patients up front, if we can localize the clot, if we can characterize the clot, and then if we can integrate that information into the Azurion cath lab, helping not just diagnose, but also navigate the treatment in the cath lab, that's what's going to make a difference. And this next generation Azurion is the platform that's going to allow a lot of these innovations. But up till now, it's largely been for interventional radiologists, interventional cardiologists, structural heart disease experts, EP physicians, and vascular surgeons. And we see neurovascular disease as the next frontier to help physicians save more lives. That's why we've launched the next generation Azurion biplane optimized for neurovascular disease. Let's just take the impact of stroke. You know, stroke is a devastating disease, and one patient every 2 seconds somewhere on Earth has a stroke. It's the #1 cause of disability in the world. It's the #2 cause of death. So that's why we believe we can help make a difference with this next generation Azurion. And it has a whole bunch of new features. It's optimized with hardware for neuro, a new biplane geometry, faster motion, more flexibility, head immobilization, but also image quality improvements, faster acquisition, faster reconstruction, motion compensation, and exquisite quality cone beam CT. Well, I think there's no question that many of these digital health technologies are going to find a role within healthcare. It's going to take a bit of time, but we've also been looking at a lot of these solutions for the past 10 years, specifically things around artificial intelligence, AR, or virtual reality, or mixed reality, spatial computing, as Apple calls it. And also robotics and automation are extremely interesting, and novel endovascular devices that we're developing, and new ways of imaging, maybe imaging without radiation, like we're now doing with FORS and LumiGuide. So let's just take a few of these. Let's take AR, for example. We've been exploring the use of augmented reality in the interventional suite for about a decade. In fact, it's hard to believe, 5 years ago, Microsoft launched HoloLens 2, and I was honored to be at their keynote with their CEO, where they launched HoloLens 2 and showed how it could also be used to save lives potentially as they were exploring technologies, integrating it into an Azurion. And since then, we've been doing lots of clinical testing on the use of augmented reality, specifically in stroke. We have a clinical trial underway to see if we can take 3D rotational angiograms and have physicians measure the aneurysms using AR versus on a workstation, and looking at speed and accuracy and comfort. We're looking at ergonomics. You know, everybody can have their own set of data right in front of them in the lab. They don't have to crane their necks looking at a large screen. We're looking at 3D visualization. You know, we're imaging people's bodies in 3D, but we're putting that information on a 2D screen in the cath lab, especially in the neurovascular space. Wouldn't it be better if we can see it as a hologram? Well, in fact, we can. And we are piping some of that data from an Azurion into all of these headsets. We're also looking at, more importantly, system control. I'm actually quite passionate about this. It's not just about imaging, but it's also about controlling our Azurion. And so I want to be able to control the system using gesture and voice, and even eye tracking on selecting buttons with my eyes. Why? Because we want to keep the focus where it matters the most, on the patient. I don't want to have to worry about how to operate the system. Azurion should feel like just an extension of my hands and minds. And there's a whole bunch of other applications: training, simulation, and it'll unlock, I think, tele-interventions as well, being able to look over the shoulder and help physicians in the room next door or even continents away as they go through their procedures. So that's augmented reality. And we've been exploring, certainly with Microsoft, also for the past several years, been working closely with Apple on with their new Apple Vision Pro, which I think takes this technology to the next level. And these are certainly very nascent technologies. I think they're going to continue to leapfrog, just like we saw with the cell phone industry. But there's no question in my mind that we will be living in an era of augmented reality at some point in the future. Robotics also is very interesting to us. Robotics and automation, I think, at its simplest, you can think of it as a remote control car. And I can drive a catheter while I'm looking at a screen and navigate it through the body. But to me, that's simple. It will unlock tele-interventions. So for instance, with stroke, I think it'll help expand access to care. But I actually have a much bolder vision for robotics. What we want to do at Philips is not just have a remote control car, we want a self-driving car. You know, we have cars that can pull themselves out of a driveway, and then you take over and you navigate the car from there. Similarly, we anticipate that robotics will be an accessory, an assistant to the physician in the lab. So if you have the Azurion, which is the eyes, and I can see inside of you with the Azurion, and I have the brains, the artificial intelligence baked in, and I have the hands of a robot, and we have a feedback loop, suddenly that robot could be my assistant, and maybe I can select a certain vessel and it'll navigate a catheter to the vessel for me, and then I take over that portion of the procedure.